BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Cathy Clugston. Good evening. The government has acknowledged that removing student grants was a mistake after a review called for a radical shake-up of university funding in England. The study also says tuition fees should be slashed, but students could end up paying back more over 4 decades. Donald Trump has launched a scathing personal attack on Robert Mueller, a day after the former special counsel refused to exonerate the president of obstruction of justice. Senior Conservatives say the Tory leadership race is descending into chaos. The former head of the Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, has denied any military cover-up after the Ballymurphy shootings in Belfast in 1971. Also tonight, Labour reviews its decision to expel Alistair Campbell, and England win the first match of the Cricket World Cup. Universities have raised concerns about their future funding after a major review of higher education in England called for a significant cut in tuition fees. The report, commissioned by the government, also proposes to extend the time students will have to pay back the loan from 30 to 40 years. Theresa May has made it clear she wants her successor to back the proposals, and in particular to reintroduce maintenance grants for students from the poorest backgrounds. The report was written by the banker Philip Auger. Critics question whether a future government would be prepared to fund the changes he's recommended. Here's our education editor, Branwen Jeffries.
Philip Auger is calling for fees to drop to £7,500 from the current £9,250 a year by 2021. But graduates would start paying back at a lower threshold of £23,000 of earnings and pay for 40 years before loans were written off, 10 years more than now. I spoke to students at Royal Leamington Spa College who told me it didn't alter their view of the cost of university.
When you hear that, you instantly think, oh, because it's lower, things are going to get better. But when you actually think about it, even though it's lower, there's also the added 10 years.
Someone who's starting maybe not straight out of school will literally be paying back a loan for their whole working life. And it just seems a bit ridiculous, really.
40 years is a long time. Many of us do remember that when university fees were that much lower, it doesn't seem like a brilliant proposition in terms of value for money.
But they did like the idea of a learning loan available throughout their life for higher qualifications short of a degree. The students at this further education college said vocational routes needed more support. The other major change suggested is a £3,000 a year living cost grant for poorer students at both university and college. They were abolished for undergraduates in 2016. Today, Theresa May said she would back their reintroduction.
Such a move would ensure students are supported whichever route they choose, and save those from the poorest backgrounds over £9,000. It will be up to the government to decide at the upcoming spending review whether to follow their recommendation. But my view is very clear. Removing maintenance grants from the least well-off students has not worked, and I believe it is time to bring them back.
Universities have been much better funded than colleges, but they argue a cut in tuition fees would reduce investment in student facilities. The report says any shortfall should be topped up by the government where courses have social or economic value. Sir David Bell is Vice-Chancellor of the University of Sunderland. He's concerned about the consequences of any shortfall.
If that income isn't made up, then there's a risk that the headline-grabbing reduction in fees actually proves to be much more difficult and problematic for students in the future. It would have consequences in terms of the number of staff employed, the services that we provide, the facilities that we provide and so on.
The rest of the UK will be watching. Northern Ireland, with its lower fees of just over £4,000, and Scotland, with no fees, may be worried most about a loss of income from English students. For Wales, there are bigger implications. To pay for very generous maintenance grants for poorer students, it's recently raised fees to £9,000, so it's vulnerable to a lower price across the border. In England, with Labour promising to abolish fees, the next Conservative leader may look to this report to form a policy for the next general election. But this is Theresa May's last announcement, and there's no guarantee her successor will accept it.
President Trump has lashed out at Robert Mueller, the special counsel who investigated Russian interference in the 2016 election, claiming he'd been motivated by a business dispute and professional jealousy. Yesterday, Mr Mueller underlined that he had not cleared Mr Trump of acting illegally, intensifying calls from some Democrat politicians for the president to be impeached. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
Donald Trump has questioned the integrity of Robert Mueller before, but never like this. Yesterday, the special counsel broke his silence at a Department of Justice podium with a dramatic statement that if his team had thought Donald Trump was innocent of obstruction of justice, they'd have said so. Today it was the president's turn, and he gave Robert Mueller both barrels. He was deeply conflicted. They'd had a business disagreement. The president had thwarted his ambitions to become FBI director. The special counsel was a Trump opponent, and his team were angry Democrats. Never mind that these claims are highly tendentious. The president was doing his best to undermine Mr. Mueller's credibility.
He is a total conflicted person. I think Mueller is a true never-Trumper. He's somebody that dislikes Donald Trump. He's somebody that didn't get a job that he requested, that he wanted very badly, and then he was appointed.
Earlier, the president had put out a very odd tweet, which contained the words, "I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected." The first admission from Donald Trump that Russia might have been instrumental. Commentators pointed out the president had committed the ultimate Washington gaffe, unintentionally telling the truth. But when he spoke to reporters, he was quick to walk back that tweet. With Cheshire Cat grin, he said, "You know who got me elected? I got me elected."
It's emerged that the White House asked the US Navy to move the warship USS John McCain out of Mr Trump's sight when he visited Japan earlier this week. The ship is named after the father and grandfather of the Republican senator with the same name who died last year. He and Mr Trump had clashed frequently. The president denied having any prior knowledge of the request to move the ship, but described it as well-meaning. Mr McCain's daughter, Meghan, tweeted that Mr Trump still seemed unable to let her father rest in peace. The senior Conservative backbencher Ian Duncan-Smith is calling for changes to the rules governing the party's leadership race, saying the contest is in danger of looking like chaos. Mr Duncan-Smith, himself a former Tory leader, says the party should consider increasing the number of MPs needed to nominate a candidate and making it possible to eliminate more contestants in each round. But the former Conservative Chancellor, George Osborne, told the PM programme that it was a good thing so many hopefuls had come forward. Here's our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
Never before has there been a leadership contest with quite so many candidates, 11 so far declared, with up to another 5 waiting in the wings. A crowded and cluttered field that's provoking increasing alarm among senior Tories, fearful it risks degenerating into a protracted, unwieldy and chaotic contest. There's also a strong suspicion that some of the candidates are there simply to boost their own profiles, not because they have the least chance of winning. They're taking the mick, said one senior Tory. In order to address this, the executive of the 1922 committee is poised on Monday to rewrite party rules to weed out some of the more peripheral candidates. One idea being considered is to insist each candidate has the support of at least 10 MPs. At present, they only need to be nominated by 2. It's likely that some of the less experienced candidates will also come under pressure to withdraw. The former Tory leader, Ian Duncan-Smith.
This is not like a normal leadership election. This is the point I keep making. This is a leadership election, but to be Prime Minister, which means that we have to be very focused that the person taking this will, the day after the final result, be the Prime Minister and have to pick up the pieces of Brexit and all the other elements. And that's got to require somebody who really knows where they're going.
Some of the less well-known candidates have defended their entry into the contest on the grounds that political outsiders, like Jeremy Corbyn, have gone on to win recent leadership battles. There's also impatience among a younger generation of Tory MPs at an old guard they believe has failed. And there was support for a wider range of candidates from the former Chancellor George Osborne.
I don't think it's a problem there's so many candidates. I know everyone thinks that's a bit of a joke, but that's not a bad thing, that the party's got a choice. And if anything, maybe the party was, rushed to a decision 3 years ago. But I do think these candidates should be put under proper scrutiny.
Theresa May, asked today about the plethora of candidates, joked that it showed Britain was a country of opportunity. Privately, however, some senior Tories believe it's no laughing matter and that a party unable to organise an orderly leadership contest is unlikely to convince the country it can organise an orderly Brexit.
New figures show that donations to the Conservative Party slumped in the first 3 months of this year. The Electoral Commission said the Tories received £3.7 million, less than half the value of donations in the previous 3 months. In the same period a year earlier, the party was given around £4.8 million. The Shadow Attorney-General, Lady Chakrabarti, has said Alistair Campbell's expulsion from the Labour Party should be reviewed. Tony Blair's former communications director was thrown out after revealing that he'd voted for the Liberal Democrats in last week's European elections, something many other party members have subsequently admitted to. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
In the 2 days since Alistair Campbell's expulsion, scores of people claiming to be Labour members have taken to Twitter, using the hashtag #ExpelMeToo, parading the fact they also voted for parties that want a second referendum in last week's European elections. Mockery of the decision to kick out Alistair Campbell has been matched with condemnation from former Labour cabinet ministers to the party's current deputy leader, Tom Watson, who called the move spiteful. He said there should be an amnesty for members who had rejected Labour's Brexit policy at the ballot box. Earlier this week, a Labour spokesman said publicly declaring or encouraging support for another party was against the rules and incompatible with membership. But today, Shami Chakrabarti said the party would have a rethink.
Merely voting for another party is not in itself a grounds for exclusion. As to Alistair Campbell or any other individual who has expressed public support for other parties, I hope that they can come forward and talk about their future intentions and the case can be reviewed.
Speaking in Dublin after meeting the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, Jeremy Corbyn said a general election or a referendum would be the only way out of the Brexit crisis. Labour is divided on the question of a second referendum, but with the UK